So, Bob, I thought we would read patron emails and respond to them. What do you say?
I say yes.
Okay, this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Bob?
I am your old friend from graduate school and a therapist in practice here in Seattle as well.
How can people find you if they wanted to hire you as a therapist in this area?
I just say go out on the street and yell.
Bob.
My website, bobgoettle.com.
bobgoettle.com. Bob as in Bob, Goettle as in Goettle.
It's a weird name.
Is it German?
Yeah, German. And actually, you know what? Here's one for you. It means little God. Did I ever tell you that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which I used to think was cool, but now I think, who has the hubris to
Little
name
God.
themselves little God? Except besides me.
Yeah. So Goettle.
When you come over from Ellis Island, they give you 7 letters. So originally it's G-O with the 2 dots, T-T-L-E-I-N, which is Gertlein, which means little God.
Oh, okay.
So they just chopped it off. And
Is your real name Robert?
Robert, correct.
I don't think I'd ever thought about that. Robert.
Yeah. You know, if I could trade it in, Bob, it's a terrible name.
Bob?
Yeah.
I mean, I've always known you for all this time, and so I'm just used to it. But yeah, when you think about the name Bob, you think old guy.
Old guy, your uncle who's sort of questionable.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I wonder how many people younger than you are named Bob.
Oh, yeah.
Or choose to say Bob instead of
Right.
Robert.
Yeah, no, most of them are Rob.
Rob.
Yeah, even in my generation, they're mostly Rob.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why did you go Bob? Your family went Bob?
Yeah.
So they named you Robert, but then deemed you Bob, and then you just now go by Bob.
Well, yeah, I was Bobby when I was a kid.
Oh, you were Bobby.
Yeah.
Okay. Bobby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great 70s kid name.
Right.
Bobby.
Yeah.
A lot of Bobbies.
It's a terrible name any other era. Maybe even then, too.
We used to call you Bobby G.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I still get that occasionally.
Yeah. Okay. So this is from patron David. David writes that a YouTube personality and icon in the gaming community passed away after fighting cancer. His name was Total Biscuit on YouTube. Have you heard of Total Biscuit?
No.
Apparently, I didn't. Maybe I've come across Total Biscuit stuff on YouTube and didn't recognize or note that it was Total Biscuit, but apparently a very beloved figure in the YouTube gaming world. And patron David says that he was deeply saddened by the news of it, and it made him feel, to think about his own losses in his own life, and he's grieving. And he said lots of people are grieving. And he saw a Reddit post that said, "I know I don't deserve to grieve because I didn't know him personally." Bob, what do you think about this idea?
Nuts. Yeah, man, you feel the way you feel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you. I've never picked a single emotion I've ever had, and if I have sadness, then I have sadness.
Yeah.
I don't think emotions are about deserving in the least.
Yeah. But what about this idea of like, well, why are you sad? You didn't know him. He's not your husband or your father or your brother. Like, why are you so, because some people get really upset, they're
Sure.
not just like, oh, bummer,
Right.
And, they'll have similar emotions to situations in which they lost a parent or a spouse or something.
Right.
What do you say to that? To people who say there's something wrong with you or something wrong with your life or something for choosing to be so attached to someone that you've never met.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, one of my favorite things about living out here in the Northwest is occasionally people get lost out there in the mountains, in the woods, and it isn't just like their family shows up to look for them. Like strangers show up, not just the pros, like the fire and rescue people or whoever that is, but just regular folks show up. And what I think is it's an extension of empathy. It's a recognition of self and the other. And so when your person here is noticing this thing on Reddit where somebody's having sadness and questioning whether or not it's okay, I think they probably feel embarrassed about it. And I think it's okay to feel that way. Whatever, you feel the way you feel. But what they're doing, I think, is just participating in the fact that they're a member of the species. Just like people take great joy in, when their sports team does well. Like, hey, we won, the Eagles, we won the Super Bowl, but we didn't win. I didn't play. I never played football in my life.
Or even an extension of that, watching an athlete from another country whom doesn't even represent your community doing well. You can cry or celebrate or feel all the feels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a wonderful analogy, Bob. I think I'm going to bank that one for myself in terms of when someone is lost in the mountains, a huge group of people will respond and volunteer their time and because they care. And probably most of them have never even met the person. I mean, maybe the person's an asshole, but it doesn't matter because we care about not only our species, but even anything that we identify as having emotions and being and suffering.
Right.
And so whether that's polar bears, it's like, seeing there was this one video of this one polar bear that I'll never forget. I've talked about on the podcast before, in which it was probably like, 7 or 8 years ago. For some stupid reason, I clicked on it, the video, and the polar bear has some sort of seizure in a zoo. And so someone's filming the polar bear because they're at the zoo. They're like, oh, polar bear. And this polar bear has this like god-awful seizure and falls off the rock into the water and drowned.
Oh, God.
And it's burned in my head because it was just this violent, somewhat preventable, because it's like seizures are horrible, but if there was some sort of way to have grabbed the polar bear or not let the polar bear out that day, or I don't know, it's like the drowning. It's just so tragic. And so, and I never met that polar bear, right? Presumably.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like this, and there's stuff like more recent deaths, like Kate Spade, the fashion designer. Did you know this fashion designer?
No.
Did you know people who knew this fashion designer?
Colleen, my wife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't know this fashion designer, but I knew a lot of people who knew her and loved her.
Yeah.
What did Colleen say about Kate Spade? Anything? Guys, educate me about.
She makes purses.
Okay. and is an interesting personality, I'm guessing, or something.
Probably most of them are, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Anthony Bourdain. You heard about him?
Right. What's your relationship with Anthony Bourdain?
I've seen him on the shows. TV? No, on the shows. And then my nephew loves him. Like his show where he go all over the world and, eat the local food and, like a real mensch, like just a decent guy wandering the planet. And I just feel sad. I think we don't have enough of that.
Yeah, I read his book or I listened to it on audio. He reads it too. And this was early aughts, I'm thinking. Or wait, mid-aughts. I was listening to his book on tape, his Kitchen Confidential, I think it's called. And not only is it just interesting, and he has a very raw, kind of straightforward, no bullshit manner of writing and reading, but he's lived an interesting life. And also, did you ever work in restaurants?
Oh, fast food when I was a kid.
Okay. Well, I had a fair number of restaurant jobs when I was younger. Yeah, like my very first job was in a Chinese restaurant in Issaquah.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't even have a social security number, so I was getting like paid under the table at first, and because Chinese people don't care about the law so much at all times, and apparently Japanese people, being myself, and so I worked there for, I don't know, a few years, and I was 13 years old, so it was very impressionable on me,
Yeah.
And then I worked at I worked at Denny's actually for a while.
What'd you do?
I was a dishwasher and busboy.
Yeah.
That was an experience in Bellevue at Eastgate. It's not there anymore. I worked at, let's see, there's got to be other restaurants, but the big restaurant that I really worked at there's two big restaurant experiences I had growing up, which is one, I worked at the Salish Lodge, which is at Snoqualmie Falls.
Really? What'd you do there?
I was like a server banquet person.
No kidding.
Yeah, my brother was a chef there. My brother for the first half of his career life was a chef,
Really cool.
like a hardcore chef,
Yeah.
with the hat and all the things
Yeah,
and
1,500 orders to fill in 10 minutes.
yeah, and fancy cuz Salish is like, it's semi-fancy-ish, people come there. If anyone's seen Twin Peaks, the TV show, there's a lodge it looks like it's going to fall down a cliff, and it's right by this waterfall. That's the Salish Lodge. It used to be called the Snoqualmie Falls Lodge, but now it's called Salish Lodge. Salish is a local or an American Indian tribe in the area. Anyway, and so my brother got me a job there when I was like 19 or something, and man, was that job educational and hard. I mean, because there's all these different banquet rooms, and they would have Thanksgiving banquets, and so I would work on Thanksgiving and stuff.
That's intense.
And you're on your feet, and you were supposed to wear black shoes, like it was required, because you wore like basically like a mini tuxedo kind of thing walking around. And back then, the shoe technology was not very good. Like they didn't make black shoes that looked good, but also gripped the floor.
Yeah.
They only had black shoes with those leather bottoms.
Right.
And leather bottoms are essentially like ice.
Yeah.
They're as slippery as like ice.
Yeah.
And when you're on a tile floor with water on it, because any working kitchen is constantly damp, And I took one. And the other thing was they told you to. I loved the cart, because it's like you can't go wrong with the cart. But we do these banquets, and like the one thing I realized about banquets is that when it's mealtime, you have to get everyone's food out. You have to make everyone's food, you have to plate everyone's food, and you have to get everyone's food out in a relatively short amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't have like one table completely done with their meal while other people don't even have their meal yet. Like it just feels weird, right? And plus, like, you got to get these people in and out. And anyway, so there's this huge pressure to just like get it out, blah, 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 and you're rushing out there. And the thing that they wanted you to do was to have it on a humongous tray. So those waiter trays that you hold on your side, like you're pushing up your hair kind of a thing, but it wasn't the normal tray side. It was this oval long tray where you could stack, I believe. So, they had plates, and then they had the metal frames, the metal tops, covers.
Right.
So you could stack like probably like one, at least another layer, and you could carry like, I don't know, maybe 16 or 20, maybe 16 plates with covers, with food on one arm. Okay.
Freaking heavy.
Yeah, but if you did it right, it wasn't very laborious, but people obviously get good at being able to balance. It's like a stage show, you get good at being able to do that. And I got okay at it, but I wasn't that great. And then combine that with my slicks of shoes and the wet tile, and I went down.
Oh, wow.
And there's nothing worse, because all the I'm in the kitchen, all that, like, there's like 10 chefs, and all of them just look, because it's just racket, and everyone turns and they're just like, well, those are 20 plates we're not going to get back. So back to the drawing board. Thank you, Kirk, for just, destroying our hard work there.
Right.
And then the head chef is like, thank you, Kirk, for just, de-profiting our business by probably about $40. Thanks for just, bringing our numbers down. And
right.
We're going to have to.
Next time, just throw it on the floor before we cook it.
Yeah. Next time, just go to the cash register and catch it on fire. Why don't you? And I did that at Sun too, actually. When I was 13, I dropped a big rack of tea cups and those little Chinese restaurant teacups and broke a bunch. And man, just nothing worse than that. Anyway, so and then later on, I had a close friend. You remember Donna?
Sure.
Yeah. So she worked at the Painted Table downtown,
Oh, I remember that place.
which was in
Alexis Hotel.
Alexis Hotel. Thank you.
Nice.
Your memory, your head is a trap, man. You do not forget things. You're a savant when it comes to stuff like that. Seriously, there are things that you remember. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty good with
You
memory.
are.
I mean, I feel like what people come to people will say, like I just said, Anthony Bourdain, Kitchen Confidential.
Right.
Listen to it mid-aughts. Like
Right.
like that was 13 years ago. I can because I remember where I was driving as I was listening to it in
Right.
the car, and I had to have been in my house by your house now.
Oh, right.
And I
yeah,
lived
right.
there in the mid-aughts. And anyway, the point is that you have a kick-ass memory.
Thank
and
you.
so so Donna was a close friend, and the Painted Table was like sort of like just below those super high-end restaurants in Seattle.
Yeah.
It was considered to be like one of the most competitive, well-reviewed. It had a famous chef, someone who in the trades around the United States, people knew him. I think he was half Korean, which gave him kind of an interesting edge. But Donna would talk a lot about what it was like to work there. And I learned so much, man. Like, I have so much more respect for chefs. And so listening to Anthony Bourdain's book, like, just fleshed that whole world out. Because if you don't know it, you just think, just casually people cooking food, just like, whatever. But these people take it so seriously, and it's hard work too. There's flames, and you burn yourself,
Right.
and you drop knives. Like chefs who work in these places, they have shoes with protection so that if you drop a knife, it won't go through your foot, because that happens sometimes. I remember Donna had burn marks, always gnarly burn marks, because she was like the grill person, and just gnarly burn marks all over her arms. And she was just like, well, that's just the way it is, because, and that was the other part of it, was like everyone, it was almost like the military or a police force or something.
Right.
It was like, there's no time to complain.
No.
Suck it up, kid. And if you can't take it, we'll find someone else, because there's other people who are dying to get on that grill job, or dying for that, eventual working your way up to sous chef kind of situation, and it was just super. And then after the shift was over, it was like firefighters having fought a fire. Everyone sort of relaxes, and there's camaraderie and lots of alcohol and lots of drugs.
Yeah.
And the wait staff gets involved. Like, it's this team effort. Everyone's like, we're going to do it tonight, and we're going to nail it, and we're not going to have any problems, and we're going to deal with that asshole customer. And when that person sends that thing back, we're going to deliver. And when we have 16 steaks we got to cook at the same time, we're going to make it happen. There's this, and then at the end of the night, it's just this huge relief. And then everyone drinks, and then they're up till 4 a.m, because these restaurants have a bar. And so you just lock the front door, and the bartender stays behind, and everyone just drinks to oblivion. You sleep in till noon the next day, and then your shift starts at 3, and the whole thing starts all over again.
Right.
And just that lifestyle, and one of which I would never want to, and also the artistry of it all too. It's like edible art, right? People consider it to be like, it's not just cooking a steak. It's like, I'm an artist.
Yeah.
I'm creating a work of beauty that is going to give someone pleasure right now. It's like there's not a lot of art you can say that about, where it's just like, I'm gonna make something right now, and you're gonna enjoy it right now. You need it to live, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, listening to Anthony, when I think of Anthony or Bourdain, I think about all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And also I know someone who has met Anthony Bourdain, and he said that Anthony Bourdain wasn't really like the way you would think he would be, because according to his persona, you'd think he'd be like this gruff,
abrasive,
dismissive, in your face,
Yeah.
like wouldn't really listen to you, but couldn't be opposite. He was nice, listen to you, eye contact, caring, interesting, treated everyone the same. And so, yeah, for him to kill himself, I think he was 61. I feel like, I mean, Kate Spade must feel pretty bad to a lot of people as well, just because you're so young. And with Anthony Bourdain, it's like a lot of people are like, well, he had so much, and how strict, because he had a hit TV show. He's probably rolling in dough.
Yeah.
People loved him.
Yeah.
And it's a shocker to people as to it's dissonant to people. It's like, because I think a lot of people equate success or the way someone comes across to mean that they're not sad. Do you know what I mean?
Right, that they don't have troubles.
Right.
Yeah.
And or they equate when people are sad that means they're going to kill themselves or something.
Yeah.
What do you think that's about, that misconception?
So you're saying, well, actually, I think that's sort of the opposite of what we're talking about. That would be like a failure in empathy, where I cannot get out of my shoes and into your shoes. Maybe because you live in a world that's so vastly different from mine that I don't have a way to imagine it. I imagine rich guy, successful on TV, and then my brain fills in a lot of the gaps about, well, what that means. And that's like, oh, well, that's a happy guy who's successful, who drives a Ferrari and gets a blowjob every other day. And, nobody's life is really like that. But when I don't, for whatever reasons, probably a million reasons, I don't take the time to kind of imagine, well, what actually is that guy's life like? Not that I could, because I don't know how he spends his time. I just see him a little bit, this little slice of on camera.
Right.
That's all I get. So anyway, I think it's a human. We're not perfect. We're not great. We're not always good at empathizing. Even guys like you and me do this for a living.
Yeah, especially with famous people, I find.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
People will attack famous people with impunity. They'll just be like, "Oh, at Jennifer Lawrence, you're a slut." And it's like, Jesus Christ, this is a human being. Like, if it's one thing that the breaking down of the barrier between the rabble like us and famous people with the use of Twitter or YouTube or something, you realize like there is nothing different about us and famous people.
No,
it's just they just have a lot more eyes on them, but they have the exact same insecurities.
Right.
And like the whole thing about the Sixers coach. Do you follow this story?
No, I don't know this one.
Oh, the 76ers basketball team coach. He has recently been fired / resigned because he and or his wife were creating fake Twitter accounts to attack people who were attacking them on Twitter.
Oh.
But they were also using these accounts to attack the players of the 76ers who were perceived as somehow politically opposed to some of the things that it's a very interesting, complicated story. But the point is that these and all you got to do is to look to our president to realize that even being the president of the United States, of the most powerful country, the most powerful military, arguably the most powerful man who has ever lived on this planet, is clearly insecure at times.
Oh.
And will attack, and I don't follow it that closely, but I've seen reports of Trump attacking people on Twitter, just like a soccer mom who says something kind of adversarial to him, and he'll respond to her and say like, "How dare you?" or he'll block her. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but the point is that famous people have the exact same set of feelings and exact same insecurities as anyone else does, and so Anthony Bourdain is no different from that. But also, I find that when I hear people, I've been listening to podcasts talk about Anthony Bourdain and his suicide, and I find that there's often a thing that people will say is like, they'll say something like, "It just goes to show you that even though you have it all, it doesn't protect you from sadness or something like that.
No.
And I just find that to be like so obvious to me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because one, what is quote unquote having it all? You know, it's because we in our society privilege class and fame so much. We look at those people and go like, they've arrived. They can just sit back and be happy for the rest of their lives knowing what they've achieved. But that no one is like that. Very few people I can imagine, just other than Buddhists, I imagine, can just sit down and say like, okay, I'm done. I've achieved everything. I no longer need to impress people. My self-esteem is complete. Do you know?
I doubt that the Buddhists are really good at that either.
Right. So, and the other misconception I think is that people really just don't understand, which makes sense because of a lot of reasons, that they don't really understand depression and or suicide.
Yeah.
There's this notion that a depressed person looks depressed, or their cartoon version of what depression looks like. And two, that suicide is some kind of noticeable thought.
Oh,
You know, like, well, surely I would, people would look for signs of Anthony Bourdain's suicidal thoughts. Robin Williams was suicidal for decades, I think, off and on.
Yeah.
And he was arguably the most opposite of suicide in terms of the way he acted. You know,
Right.
He seemed so jubilant and
Yeah.
happy and energetic. Suicide is something that crosses people's minds, and unless they choose to tell you, you'll never know.
And yeah, it's funny because 85% of the population has had thoughts about suicide at one point or another.
Interesting.
And then the other thing that I think is relevant here is that 30% of completed suicides are decided within 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. And they know that because, the folks that survive, but for the grace of God, they'll say, 30% of them say, I just thought of this 5 minutes ago and acted on my impulse.
Right. Which is the tragedy of it
Yeah.
all.
So
in that if there was something that could be done,
Yeah.
some measure, some connection, some plan to prevent them with the means to do it, they would get through that 5
Yeah.
minutes and be happy with the decision that they decided not to kill themselves.
Right.
Having said all that, there are also people, in my estimation, who are so determined and so, this is a rare individual, but there are some people who they just want to die.
Yeah.
Whether it's from a medical condition or a psychological one. I mean, there are some psychological conditions and ongoing emotional turmoil that any one of us would contemplate suicide as a super viable option, given the amount of suffering that produces. And it's hard to imagine, if you've never had that happen, it's hard to imagine what that would be like.
Right.
I can imagine it kind of because there's been brief moments where I've had some massive medical, not massive, but like probably minor medical problem,
Scared the hell out of you.
Well, scared, but also just it's depressing to feel like this is my life now.
Yeah.
And I'll always be thinking about that. This is going to be this constant nag into my happiness that just is going, every time I feel happy, this thing is going to insert itself into that and ruin it. And it just feels hopeless. And it's like, well,
yeah,
I'm going to die eventually anyway. Why suffer the last phase of this? Why not just take it to the next phase and just end it, And
it's hard for a person to imagine accommodating whatever the trouble is and finding out what life is like with this thing on board. Generally, well, I don't know if generally, perhaps people overestimate the impact. I don't even like that I just said that. I imagine it's sometimes true.
Absolutely, yeah. For some people, if they wait long enough, perspective or acceptance, so to speak,
Yeah.
will prevail.
Yeah.
And suicide will seem completely irrelevant, and they can appreciate their life for what it is. Also, there are some people that it just doesn't happen. Or, it's too much suffering.
Yeah.
Or they just don't want to accept it for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I feel like for them, me personally, that they deserve the right to end their life, and it's a tragic ending, but their life was already tragic. And just because they were alive doesn't necessarily mean that they were, we tend to look at life as this wonderful thing.
Right.
Life, being alive, and death is death. Death is bad.
Yeah.
Alive, being alive. For some people, it's flipped.
Yeah.
For some people, it is like being alive is shit.
Yeah.
Being alive is terrible. Like, I'd rather one either go to heaven or just not exist than to be here,
Right.
for this long. And so I just think that I don't know exactly what I'm saying or why, but I just feel like I wonder if, for example, with Kate Spade or with Anthony Bourdain, if they were in an afterlife right now or could speak from the abyss, if they would say, "Don't worry about me. Believe me, I'm glad I'm gone." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, possible.
I feel like there's this kind of universal reaction around suicide that is like it could have been prevented, and for sure, because in my mind, it's like probably 98% of the time it could have been prevented and should have been prevented,
Yeah.
and for the betterment of the individual, and obviously for those who love that person.
Right. That's one of the things, man. Once you kill yourself, you no longer have say over the influence that you have on other people. And if you're a parent, you've just fucked your kid.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're advocating for suicide.
No, I'm not. But I'm also advocating for everyone to understand those who think about suicide and who complete suicide.
Right.
That it's not, because like one of the things that people will say sometimes is that when people survive jumping off a bridge, for example, they will report afterwards that as soon as they jumped, they regretted it.
Right.
And certainly that can be true for a lot of people.
Sure.
But that's a biological mechanism that kicks in. Like there's a reason why suicide is contemplated for so long before someone actually attempts, on average.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that is because as an organism, we have a huge mechanism in our brain that prevents us from harming ourselves.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be so much motivation to overcome that.
Right.
Or some means that makes it easier or something.
Right.
And so when you make that leap, whether or not your whole brain wants to do it or not, even though your whole brain obviously wanted to do it because you actually, in all likelihood spent years thinking about it, you probably went to the bridge 50 different times and you jump. Like there's a part of your body that flinches at the last minute and you regret it. You know what I mean?
Well, humans are that way with a lot of the decisions they make.
Yeah.
They get buyer's remorse.
Right.
They like immediately have regret. I don't know that. I think I like what you're saying because I don't think we should necessarily treat the regret like that means this was a mistake.
Right. That all suicides are a mistake. Do you know what I mean? That's the way that I feel like a lot of media are talking about it.
Yeah.
And it obviously it's the safer route, and I'm taking a risk by saying the things that I'm saying. Right.
I think a listener has to listen to you very carefully to understand that you are not advocating for suicide. You're just not willing to condemn people who complete it.
Right. And I'm not willing to say that it was necessarily like if we could somehow like revive them from the dead, that they would say, "Thank you for reviving me."
Yeah, they might not.
Right. They might be like, "Fuck you." Like this was my choice.
Right.
And because I feel like when people die, say of cancer or something like Total Biscuit, there's a there's a different vibe to it. It's tragic and sad, but it's like, well, the universe took that person from us,
right?
Rather than that person took themselves away from us, and we could have prevented it,
right?
And we should have prevented it.
Maybe what you're saying in part is that suicide scares us, and so we take a absolute stand against it,
right? And we can't imagine a situation in which death is like a preferable outcome or something,
right?
A chosen outcome,
right?
And for some, that's how it is. Again, as a clinician, I am obligated ethically and standard of care in the vast majority of cases. In fact, probably every case that I'd come across clinically to do everything I can to prevent. And I'm going to do a deep dive on it. It's one of the deep dives that the patrons actually asked for. By the way, I'm still completely discombobulated, if you will, discombobulated from the move, and I don't have enough space or time to actually do any deep dives, but I'm definitely going to get to them soon.
You should bring me in on that one.
On the suicide
one. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll come talk. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'd like to anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I want to actually take the opportunity to just do a super like in-depth reading of the history and the laws and case studies and assessment tools and practices and documentation, because I feel like over the past 5 years, I have developed a thing in my head, but haven't formalized it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I find that when I supervise, I feel like I'm beating my head up against the wall, because I'm telling them, I like train them a lot on suicide assessment and prevention, but there's something about it that's too complex or too scary or something that the product I'll present, and train and everything. And then I go, okay, so go out there, do an assessment on that client and let me see the documentation. And then the documentation is like half of what I would want them to be doing, or the documentation kind of misses the whole point. Like I think it's because they just don't have a lot of experience in like knowing what to emphasize. There will be something in there about like, they want to live. They make this statement like, well, I would never want to die, but nothing in there talks about the history of their suicidal ideation or whether they've attempted in the past.
Right.
And I'm like, how is this an assessment? Maybe according to this assessment, they could have attempted last week, and you haven't mentioned there's nothing in there that says anything, and like that is like one of the major data points. Like, have they attempted before?
Right.
Also, what's their statement around their motivation to actually do it or not? That's it's good that you're mentioning that, but I just feel like it's almost like there's too many details. Yeah,
there's a lot of risk factors and also protective factors to consider.
Right.
Yeah.
Things that aren't necessarily intuitive.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
anniversary events and all this kind of
Right.
stuff. And
Right.
so the list is too long for them to keep in their head. And then they hear all these random weird things like, contracts for safety are unethical or something. Have you ever heard people say that?
No.
Yeah.
Is that people think that?
So back when we were going through, and maybe this is for our episode, they would just say, just contract for safety and forget about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't exactly what they said, but that's essentially what they said.
Right.
Well, so my estimation is that at a certain point, in a similar shortcut manner, trainers would say, you can't contract for safety, because what they're really saying is, don't just rely on contracting for safety. But as a stupid shortcut, they say, stop contracting for safety. It's unethical.
Right.
Or that's the message that trainees walk out with or something. Yeah.
Right.
And so I'll hear that. I'll be like, I heard you're not supposed to contract for safety anymore. And I'm like, why the fuck wouldn't you contract for safety? Like, that shouldn't be the only thing you do, but like, what's wrong with it?
Right.
It's somehow considered to be like unethical or anyway.
Yeah.
So when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about a little bit more about Anthony Bourdain's suicide and 13 Reasons Why. What do you say?
Oh, I don't know about... Yes, of course. Okay.
All right, we're back from the break. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast yet, do so now. We're trying to get up to our next goal so that we can create a scholarship fund for listeners of the podcast who are in need of cash for their graduate degree.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, right?
What's your goal?
We're trying to get up to 900 patrons, and we're around 800 right now.
All right.
So if you're out there and you know 99 other people, like, get on it, right? Okay. So, there's this thing called suicide contagion. What do you know about that?
It happens.
Yeah. What's the definition? What's the process?
Well, as I understand it, it's when it happens with young people a lot. If somebody does it, it sort of paves the road for others to do it.
Right. It essentially, the psychological process is that either people have been contemplating it for a long time themselves,
right,
or it was sort of in the background, or they're a potential person to have suicidal ideation or behavior. And when you see other people do it, it somehow frees up the pathway in your mind to actually see it through.
Right.
It's, I guess, it in an odd way, it's sort of like having a role model or something.
Yeah. Observational learning.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, okay, that's a thing. Even though everyone knows you can, or most people know you can do it, you don't need someone to pave the way before you. But also there's a thing of grief that's involved. Like you might, like if it's a friend of yours that killed themselves, it's like, or your spouse, it's like, well, I might as well go to and meet them on the other side.
Right. First degree relative, even a peer that you're not necessarily in contact with, but who's in your loose circle.
Or even a famous person.
Right. Especially if it's someone that you model.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's suicide contagion, and it's real, and it's a observed phenomenon. We
have a policy in my skills class wherein we can't talk about self-harm, even non-suicidal self-injury. People are not allowed to talk about the specifics because it's also contagious. And when I was young and foolish and starting out learning DBT, one of my people in my class talked about a non-suicidal behavior that she did 1 week, and we didn't interrupt it, and somebody did. Somebody mimicked it. Now, nobody died. Nobody was seriously injured, but that was a hard lesson. So now we just say, and it was DBT people always say this. I was young and ignorant and learned it the hard way, that you can't talk about that. You can call it target behavior. You can say, I had an urge to do one. I did a target behavior, but you can't talk about the details because those are also contagious. Non-suicidal self-injury, also contagious.
What interesting. So in your DBT group, a member, a client, will say something like, I guess in the orientation, you tell them that they can't talk about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But people forget.
Yeah. And instead they use the phrase, I had an urge, or I actually, did a target behavior.
Right.
Does everyone know what they mean when they say that?
They might. It depends. Like if you knew that my problem was alcohol because I talked about going to AA.
Oh, so target behavior could be lots of things in a DBT group.
Yeah.
But because they're not saying the target behavior, it's probably known, it must be one of the forbidden things.
Yeah.
Because if it was a different target behavior, like going online and trying to have promiscuous sex, for example, they would just say it, right?
No, we would say you can't talk about that either, because that's a behavior that you're trying to eliminate. So yeah, but DBT was invented for folks with suicidal and self-harm impulses. So everybody in a classic DBT skills class would know what the other person was talking about. And if there are fresh wounds, we say long sleeves. You got to wear long sleeves
because it triggers other people.
Yeah, Band-Aids. not okay.
Interesting that a group focused on suicide and non-suicidal self-injury, you can't talk about suicide or non-suicide self-injury.
You can talk about what you're doing about it, but you can't talk about the fact that you did it. For
Yeah,
this.
I'm sure it's a good model, but it's just ironic.
I know, it's sort of ironic, isn't it? Yeah. We don't care about scars.
Don't care about
People
scars.
have scars on their arms or wherever. I'd say let your freak flag fly.
Well, that would be condemning everyone to long sleeves and shame, I guess.
Shame,
about
right.
their
So I
past
say
and-
short sleeves, scars, cool. Fresh wounds, no.
with the message of not that there's something shameful about what you did, but we don't want to trigger other people.
Oh, absolutely. It's just about contagion.
Right. So the last motivation that is clear in social psychology is mob mentality, which is that when we like to believe that we are independent motivational machines.
Yeah.
We are not. We are herd animals.
We are.
And when we see someone else doing something, we do it. Or we're highly influenced to do it, let's just say.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that in yourself, but it's not hard when you actually look at actual other people. It's always easier to see this sort of thing in other people,
Well, we'd like to think that we would do the noble thing or the right thing.
Or just the thing that's of independent thought,
Yeah.
All you have to do is look at your haircut when you were 15 to realize that you were not thinking independently.
I never had a mullet. I never had a mullet.
I had a brief mullet.
I need a photo.
It's not super pronounced. It's probably, I think I had a mullet for like 2 months, or in between one haircut.
Hey, listeners, I think you should write in. We need photos. We need them up.
I mean, I'll show you a photo, but so my hair is very curly when it grows out. So in the back, it's curly. So it's it's party in the front, party in the back, and sort of party in the front too. I guess business on the sides.
Yeah.
But honestly, if I showed you a picture, this is me trying to salvage myself. If you saw a picture, you wouldn't know it was a mullet unless you really looked for the curls in the back, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Anyway, yeah. I mean, when I was 15, 14, I had a step in my hair because that was big in the mid 80s.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I had a flock of seagulls throughout the 80s.
I've seen that.
Early 90s.
Yeah.
Grew my hair out in the 90s.
I remember that.
Like any respectable Seattleite.
In a band.
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, the point is that fashion, hair, speech, belief system, what you eat.
What was with the buzz cut?
For me?
Yeah, you had a buzz cut when I met you.
Yeah. I've always just liked to do different kind of haircuts.
Yeah.
Like when I became a full-time faculty member 10 years ago, for the first time in my life, and also maybe just coinciding with age, I decided for the first time I needed sort of a consistent haircut. So for the past 10 years, I've had kind of a consistent haircut. But if you look at some pictures, I have some weird haircuts in there sometimes. Not out of choice, but I just sort of tell the haircutter, do what you got to do. And sometimes they do weird things, But before that, I would always just want I just want something different. So I think I just shaved my head because I was thinking it would be fun to do.
You're the only person I knew who cut his own hair. I always thought that was cool.
Well, I couldn't afford it. I mean, none of us. I would cut my friend's hair too, to save $15 or $10 or something on something that was actually not that hard.
Yeah.
For men's short hair, it's
right.
Once you learn the basics, Yeah. But I would cut my own hair. Sometimes it was disastrous, but when you're young, you don't. At least I didn't. I didn't care.
Well, you inspired me. At one point, I was buzzing my head.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, after we got out of school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A Flowbee makes it real easy.
Did you have one?
No, my dad did though. Maybe that's where I got it from. My dad would cut our hair to save money when we were kids. and then he had a Flowbee. I think he would cut his own hair.
No kidding.
Yeah, because the thing about cutting your hair is the back of your head's really hard to cut.
Oh, I know, impossible.
Yeah, you need to use like a mirror.
And then it's all backwards.
Yeah, it gets kind of weird.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you just sort of have a fade in the back, like it any sort of nuance you're not going to be able to get.
Right.
But a Flowbee, on the other hand, you just put this attachment that sets a certain length.
Yeah.
And you just sort of rub it all over the back of your
head. Yeah.
And minimal cleanup. For those of you who don't know what Flowbee is, it's a razor that you attach to your own vacuum cleaner, and it cuts your hair while simultaneously vacuuming up all the shavings so that you don't have to clean it up afterwards.
Is it powered by suction?
Yeah. Right. I from my memory, you hook it up to an actual.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't come with its own suction thing.
Yeah, your
it's like
vacuum.
it's basically an attachment for your vacuum.
Right.
You know, that has a razor on the end with length attachments. Right. Anyway, that's where we talk about Flowbee. So that's a real thing. And after Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade, you just have to wonder if Anthony Bourdain was influenced by Kate Spade, you know?
I had that thought.
Yeah. And then you got to wonder, like, are there others coming along the way? How many people in the public have already maybe followed suit? Which again, 99% of the time is a tragic thing that could be prevented, and the individual would be happy if we could get them through that time.
Yeah. The commitment law in Washington State is set up so that you can commit somebody without court involvement for 3 days, and it's set up that way because for most people, the urge will pass within 3 days.
That's why it's set for 72 hours?
I believe so, yeah.
Interesting. Huh. I didn't know that. I always just thought it was sort of arbitrary. It's like, well, let's just set it for 3 days. So if you're thinking about suicide out there or have thought about suicide in the past, and most of people who think about suicide are actually mostly on board with trying to survive, just make sure you have extra measures. You know, talk to your therapist, have a crisis plan, have a safety plan. Don't isolate. Make sure you're talking to people. Stay away from weapons. Get rid of your pills. Get rid of your guns, for that matter.
Yes.
Talk to experts. Have a hotline available. The best thing you can do, honestly, that I always tell people, if you can remember one thing, and this goes for clinicians and clients, is don't isolate. Like if you're with other people, it is really hard to kill yourself.
Yeah.
If you're watching TV with your mom, it's really hard to just pick up a bottle of pills and kill yourself. One, because your mom will stop you. Two, because you don't want to do it in front of your mom. And three, because there's something about, because we're herd animals, there's something about being with another human being that soothes our system. Yeah. And there's something about being alone that aggravates our system.
Makes sense.
When I am alone, and I'm suffering or having a weird brain moment, my brain goes to some fucked up places. like some fucked up places, you know? And when I'm with other people, like for some reason that just doesn't happen, you know? Right. And so the key is don't isolate. And if you have a friend or family member, ask them if you can not let them isolate, you know? Right. That might even mean, in severe cases, not letting them go to the bathroom by themselves. Sure. So those are all things that we can do to get people through those 5 minutes or those 3 days that they have a particular spike in suicidality, and help them to get through it.
If you know somebody you wonder if they're thinking about suicide, it's okay to ask. You will not be planting an idea by asking. It's safe to do that, and it's better. Right.
And just say the word suicide. Don't say harm yourself, because people can be confused, and it can feel shaming to tiptoe around it. Just be like, so have you ever thought about suicide?
Or killing yourself.
Killing yourself, right.
Yeah. Just put the turd on the table.
Yeah, particularly if you're a clinician, you should know that. You shouldn't say harm yourself or be afraid to ask. Research shows there's no connection between the question and behavior. Yeah. If anything, there's probably a reduction in behavior if people ask, because that
Yeah.
begins a conversation.
Right. It's also validating.
Connects people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
we
it's so direct, but I want to piggyback on what
Please.
you're saying. If you have a friend who you're worried about, just ask them,
Yeah.
are you thinking about suicide? Or how you doing? Are you depressed? Do you think about suicide? I'm worried about you.
Yeah.
Like, just flat out bring it up.
Maybe save a life.
Maybe save a life. So people want me to talk about the TV show or the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why. You haven't seen it.
Did we finish David's question?
Did we?
David's question was about having grief.
Right. No, we did not.
I had one more thought about that I wanted to share, which is there's a poem written by a guy named John Donne many, many centuries ago. It called For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Yeah.
And the final line is, don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And it's actually about a bell that's ringing, at somebody's funeral, and somebody's wondering, well, who is that for? Who died? But I think the bell does toll for each of us. So when Anthony Bourdain kills himself, the bell tolls for me, and it tolls for you, because we are all one, really. We're all together.
I love it.
Thanks.
So, yeah, also in line with that, what I'll say is that death is sad and tragic and scary and a loss.
Yeah.
And whether it's someone who we know that's close to us, whom we're attached to, or someone that we're attached to that is a famous person, when they leave the earth and either go into oblivion if you don't believe in an afterlife, or go to the other side if you do, they're gone. And it's fucking weird, man. Like there are times when I'm like, so like with Anthony Bourdain, he's been such a sort of background character over the past 15 years for me that and I do this every time I lose someone. I always have to say, like, that person is no longer on the planet. Like they don't, it's one thing if they just like go on vacation, or I'm not going to see them anymore, or they've gone off Twitter or TV or something. Like, I lose contact with them, but they're still around. You know what I mean? They still exist, but it's a totally weird. It's like trying to imagine that the universe is an infinite. It doesn't compute with me that my grandma or Anthony Bourdain or my cat is just gone. Like, they're just gone.
Yeah.
They're not accessible by anybody on this plane anymore. And it's frightening and upsetting and a loss. And I've been studying grief and writing about grief, and one of the things that really struck me was John Bowlby's and other people's evaluation of why we grieve.
Yeah.
And one of the thoughts, it's really kind of it's impossible or difficult to study, but it makes sense to me that we evolved to, when we're, a lot of our emotional experiences are basically created when we're young. And so when we're 3, for example, and our parents leave us for some reason, we feel grief. We're sad. We panic. We yell. We scream. We're shocked. And when they come back, but before they come back, we yearn for them. We yell for them. We try to find them. And then when they come back, we feel good, and we're like, oh, thank God they weren't gone forever. And that's a evolutionary mechanism you can imagine would be good for a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old. That when separated from something that you're attached to, you freak out, and it consumes your brain, which compels you back towards those people instead of just wandering off into the wilderness and being eaten by a tiger.
Right.
So, and that basically translates into, or is retained, that process into adulthood in a way that is basically the same, but might not necessarily be evolutionarily needed anymore, but it's sort of like vestigial or something. Is the thing. I mean, obviously we evolved to be attached to attachment figures of all times, of all ages, but at all time, but to lose for instance, a grandma who's 101 years old and to have like tremendous grief around that loss. Well, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm talking my ass. But the point is that it's perhaps the most intense when we're young, and that one makes the most sense. And that's where that yearning, that sort of magical thinking of like, well, I can find them. I need to find them. Where are they? And that's why the brain will sometimes even just hallucinate somebody. Like your wife dies, and you'll come around the corner, you'll see her.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, what?
Right.
Lots of, or you'll dream about that person.
Oh yeah.
Now, some people have supernatural beliefs about that. It's fine, but you don't have to go that far to imagine your brain is still trying to find them and trying to invent them to please you because you're so desperate to have that person back. And this can apply to actually divorce or breakups too. It doesn't have to be death. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because I felt that with Anthony Bourdain, when he died. It was just like, so he's just gone.
Yeah.
Because I just saw him like on TV recent or a YouTube clip like last week,
Right.
just like I would always sort of click on, oh, he's in Singapore eating, tentacles or something, I was like, and he was always just sort of down to earth too. Anyway, so to answer your question, David and anyone else because I got these questions about Prince. I got these questions about David Bowie. As Bob said, feelings are feelings, and there's no reason to be ashamed of them. And anyone who wants to shame you for your feelings should be shamed, honestly. To be incredibly sad about the loss of someone that you've never met is completely normal. When Paul McCartney dies, which will happen, eventually, in all likelihood before I go, that will be probably the most, horrible, famous person for me. Cause I've been listening to Paul McCartney since I was born and Paul McCartney and the Beatles were this huge part of my life growing up, just humongous part of my life growing up, just all the documentaries and the songs and the lyrics and the lore and their individual careers and whatnot. And, John Lennon was already dead by the time that I really got into it. And George Harrison, although I loved him, Paul McCartney is like my boy. And I've seen him many times live, and I just wanted to be him when I was a kid. And so, and I guess I still do to some extent. So if anyone wants to shame me for having those feelings, they can go to fucking hell. So I want to talk about 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah, sure.
Netflix show. It is there's been, second season just came out, so that's why people are asking that I talk about it. And I just want to tell all the fans out there of this show and this podcast that I don't really feel like doing a deep dive. I did a deep dive on the first season, but I don't really feel like doing a deep dive on the second season for a number of reasons, of which I don't want to get into. But partially because I just don't have time to watch it and to take the notes and to blah blah blah. It would be a minimum of 13 hours plus however many hours of research and podcasting and stuff. But anyway, I just want to summarize because it kind of relates to this. So 13 Reasons Why, if people don't know, including Bob, is it was a book that was actually translated to Netflix by a friend of mine, Brian Yorkie.
Oh, really?
Who wrote a Tony Award-winning musical called, it used to be called Feeling Electric, I think, but it became Next to Normal, Broadway musical, and it's about a family, but the woman and the mother has psychosis and bipolar, and I believe she ends up killing herself in the musical. So it's got comedy in it, but it's dark comedy as well. And I knew Brian while he was developing this musical and just thought like, oh, this is off Broadway. Although this will never be recognized. It's too dark and it's too real or something. But it's a wonderful musical, and the Tony system loved him for that. And anyway, so he's translating these books into the screen, and so I've reached out to him to come on the podcast, but he's a little too busy right now. Maybe one day, but so the show is about this. It starts with a suicide. The story starts with the lead character killing herself, and then this guy who liked her in high school, they're high school kids, gets these these cassettes with 13 sides. So it'd be, what is that, 7 cassettes, actual cassettes. So it's sort of like retro, they're trying to be hipster about like cassettes instead of iPads and stuff. And so each cassette side is dedicated to it's voice recording from this girl who killed herself, and she's explaining how her road to suicide and how each person basically influenced her to eventually kill herself. Like on one side of one tape, it's talking about her relationship with this guy who like slut shamed her, and in another side, it's someone who raped her, and in another side, it's the counselor who wouldn't listen to her, and another side, it's her parents or whoever. It's so you can see how this would be a compelling book and TV show, right? Because it's chapterized already, right? And it has created a lot of controversy. By the look of your face, I'm thinking you realize one controversy, which is what?
So about blame. It sounds like it's about blame.
Right. It is basically, it basically blames people for other people's suicide.
It's a very aggressive act.
Yeah. Right. Very hostile. Very hostile act.
Is it a hostile show? Is it like got an angry
tone?
No.
It definitely has elements of that, but she's not like, she doesn't come across like, fuck you, this is why I killed myself. It's more like, so I did this, but I just want you to know, what happened or something. It's more like a really detailed suicide note or something, and not so much of it's not super aggressive.
Okay. How did you like it?
I thought there were parts of the show that were really interesting. It's a teen show though, is the thing. Like it is mostly teen. Like if you strip away the suicide, which is obviously this major element,
sure,
it's basically a teen soap opera, made for teens.
Like angst.
What's that?
Youthful angst.
Oh, okay, yeah. I've never heard of it. That's your German coming through, angst.
That's right. Jawohl.
And the interplay between the jocks and the nerds and the AV club people and the parents and it's like any other drama like that, but for teenagers, but it has this overarching thing about suicide and so it's not really made for me. I'm a 47-year-old man who his favorite show is The Americans. Did you ever watch The Americans?
Oh yeah, I watched the whole thing.
Did you finish the whole thing?
Oh yeah.
Oh man, season 6.
Yeah,
I finished it yesterday.
Yeah,
man. Did you like it?
Yeah, it was good.
I thought season 6 started out kind of boring, but by mid it just like da 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 da.
Yeah, I agree.
And I thought, without spoiling it, I thought it ended. I was trying to think like. Because I was like, oh, that's an interesting kind of... it's sort of predictable, but also kind of interesting. But on the other hand, I was like, well, how else could you have ended that without it being cheesy?
Yeah, great point.
Or without it basically reward... Because, these are spies who murdered people who were just innocent witnesses to their crimes.
Yeah. Or instrumental, but completely innocent as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, well, I got to kill this guy because he knows something or,
Yeah.
And so it's it's interesting how I would cheer for them
Yeah.
to steal American secrets or something. you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You sort of sympathize with them.
Right.
You don't sort of. You actually sympathize with these people.
Right. But if you just heard their story as a news report, these are like psychopathic, horrible people. And so I was trying to think like, well, there has to be something bad that happens to them. Like it can't be a happy ending really. But at the same time, anyway, I just thought it ended really beautifully.
Yeah.
And yet I had like, but wait,
Yeah,
like there
me
was
too.
like, anyway. So anyway, 13 Reasons Why is not really for me. And so, but there's been a lot of controversy about it. And so this isn't to insult adults who like this show. Like, I don't want to make it seem like only teenagers would like this show. There's a lot of adults that like this show.
I think what you're saying, though, is that the audience that, in general, the writers are targeting is young people.
Are what?
Young people.
Yeah, or people who like this sort of thing, and definitely it's being watched by a lot of young people,
Yeah.
like young people. Like I can't imagine many teenagers, at least not knowing about it,
Sure.
Anyway, so the controversies around the first season were that this was they have probably the most graphic suicide scene I'd ever seen, which was surprising to me. Because I don't shy away from like gore in movies.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of really gory things, I've seen David Lynch movies and horror movies at times, and seen some pretty graphic, violence and gore.
Yeah.
And yet for some reason I had never seen just a static camera shot of an actual suicide. And in 13 Reasons, I mean, I cringe just thinking about this scene. It was hard to watch.
Yeah.
And like I told people when I watched this, when I did the episode on the first season, I said, if you have some kind of trauma around suicide, like you have a friend or you think about suicide yourself, I caution people to not watch this scene because it is, even for someone like me who doesn't have traumas around that, like it mildly traumatized me. It's so graphic and realistic and painful, On the other hand, why have I seen hundreds of heads being blown off?
Yeah.
Hundreds of arms being chopped off, hundreds of limbs being blown off.
Right.
And yet never seen a suicide. Like that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I saw Saving Private Ryan, that left an impression.
Oh yeah.
But on some level, you could say like, well, shouldn't we know what war really looks like?
Well, right.
You can make an argument for that.
Sure.
So I kind of made a similar argument about this. It's like, well, shouldn't we know what suicide really looks like? Like it happens. And we can't turn the other way. Like this is much more real than murder. In Washington State, I think we have twice the amount of suicides than homicides.
Oh, is that right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Different states have different things, but
Sure.
The point is that suicide is incredibly prevalent, and the things that we focus on, like murder, homicide, terrorism, for example, like if we're just going on body count, suicide is astronomically higher than terrorism. The amount of people who die from terrorism every year is like, in the United States, is something like maximum of like 15 or something, maybe 100 maybe. I mean, after 9/11.
Yeah.
I saw a stat, maybe 100 or something is like the max of something. It's some kind of fairly low. Whereas
Do they call the school shootings? Do they call that terrorism nowadays?
it depends.
Yeah,
But
okay.
even when you add those up, 200,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't amount to that much.
But suicide is thousands.
But suicide's tens of thousands
Yeah.
in the United States every year. And yet how many depictions of actual suicide are shown? So it's like if you have a thing against showing suicide, you really should have a problem with any kind of violence on TV, in my mind. The other thing that people are saying is that because of Suicide Contagion, that depictions of suicide in fiction will cause people to kill themselves. And actually, the Suicide Association, I can't remember their name in the United States, or whatever the prevalent suicide association, made a public statement and condemned 13 Reasons Why for irresponsible behavior that would lead to people killing themselves.
Yeah, I got to say, that show, I knew about it and it scared me, and I didn't want to look at it, and I didn't want my people looking at it either.
If I was a therapist of someone who, I don't currently have any, but if I was, like a DBT person, I would, there's a lot of things to watch on Netflix. Let's steer clear of this one.
Yeah.
But when you look at the research, which there isn't much, but there is some, there doesn't seem to be any signal that demonstrates that fictional depictions of suicide actually influences people.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to measure that exactly.
Okay.
Because you can't ask someone after they're dead, like, why they did it.
Right.
And plus, even if you did ask people, like, they're self-reporting, and you can't really rely on that. Ted Bundy said that he killed all those people because of pornography. Just asking someone their motivation isn't always the best tool to actually know the mechanism that leads to behavior. But
right.
So having said that, we have demonstrable suicide contagion around people or nonfiction people. But when it comes to fiction, we seem to have maybe a mechanism that kicks in around, like, well, that's fiction, it's not real. Having said that, the 13 Reasons Why scene is extremely real. So, so anyway, when I talked about the first season, I basically said, because when it first came out, there was just tons of bad press about it, and a lot of people wringing their hands, a lot of parents worried about stuff. And what I was saying was that, isn't it interesting that when we have a show that comes out about suicide, that somehow now we're wringing our hands, when you have video games and all sorts of other things that depict murder and gore and all these other ways, then somehow that's completely fine. I mean, the Avengers movies, how many people die in that? Several people die. And so it's just interesting that we would be completely outraged against something that is, shall we say, traditionally a female thing, and this is a female character too. I think there's a little bit of sexism, a little bit of ageism in there, and just a general phobia around suicide and death, and acknowledging such things. It's scary to think about. And so we would rather not think about it. And so we just don't make fiction that depicts this, was my general thesis of just I think everyone's just reacting to that. Now, is there an actual causal mechanism for people to kill themselves? I could imagine it being true, and we should think about that. But really, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that we don't have any depictions in fiction around suicide? It seems funny to me for some reason. It seems to me like the more important thing is we need to have more robust systems of assessment, treatment, and prevention, and not necessarily ban certain kinds of media.
I agree with you. I mean, I just sort of feel like taking that off the table just somehow, it's the absence of depiction could, increase. What am I trying to say? Fill in the blanks.
I don't know what you're trying to say.
Oh, well, shit. It seems like making it taboo to talk about, or, in this case, describe in a show, just feels wrong to me.
Yeah. Feels like Nazism or something, or communism or something.
But I think it also, there's it draws, it attracts as a result of the taboo nature of things. I don't really believe in taboos, so.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of unmeasurable aspects that might be actually beneficial to having a show like 13 Reasons Why. So let's say, if we were God or the universe and we could measure this thing, I would imagine that it's possible that 10 to 20 people, this show was the last factor that pushed them over the edge. And that's the key to remember. It's not like 13 Reasons Why just takes a perfectly non-suicidal person and causes them to kill themselves. It's someone had 99 Reasons to Kill Themselves, and 13 Reasons Why was the last one. So if we can focus on the other 99, then maybe, 13 Reasons Why won't actually matter. Because how many people watched 13 Reasons Why and didn't even think about killing themselves, So to scapegoat 13 Reasons Why and not fucking scapegoat our dismal spending of public dollars on mental health, and not spending money in our public school systems to educate people, and not have on-site therapists who are supported with confidential situations, and not provide parents with education, and not raise awareness around this. I'm just going to say, those are bigger issues. 13 Reasons Why is not the thing to focus on, but somehow that's what everyone's focusing. So,
bravo.
So I could see that for a small set of people, 13 Reasons Why could have been that last factor, and they killed themselves. And so you could actually say that 13 Reasons Why is bad, however small that factor was, because it was created. But you could also see a lot of other benefits, like how long have you and I been talking about suicide at this point? Because of 13 Reasons Why on this podcast, because people are asking me about that. That's raising awareness, adding nuance, getting people to not have this be taboo, educating people. In the media, among teenagers, how many conversations did it start? Because it's really about bullying and date rape and just flat out rape and connection and listening to people and paying attention. How many people are slightly more motivated to pay more attention, to this sort of stuff. So I think that overall, I think these things are good. Now, I don't know. There's no way I can measure that. I can't.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you saying that because I think my impression of that show is that it romanticized suicide, but I don't get the impression that that's actually true.
Yeah, it really is in the eye of the beholder.
Okay.
I mean, on some level, it kind of does, because the hero in the story is this girl who was bullied and raped, and then she gets to win, and everyone else is kind of left suffering, and she gets to kind of rub it in their face in this sort of, what do they say? Righteous manner. Kind of.
It's a fun fantasy.
Yeah, kind of though.
Kind of.
She's still dead.
Yeah,
she still killed herself.
Yeah.
And you're not like, yay, she's awesome. It's more this other guy who is the main character who doesn't kill himself, who is this hero. He's like the everyman kind of character. But anyway, the second season, which I haven't seen, but I have read synopses and heard podcasts talk about it, and I have seen a couple scenes. I will say that, so they basically just went back to the original story and told other parts of the story that we hadn't seen from the previous story. So it was like scenes you didn't see during this span of time, like other background stories or other interpretation or fleshing out characters. So there's not another, it takes place in this, and there's a trial of, I don't know who's being convicted, but someone's being, maybe someone's being sued or something. And all these kids are being called onto the stand. And so episodes are people telling their story, is from what I understand. And also what I've heard is that there are more graphic, horrible scenes, not of suicide this time, but of like rape and rape with implements and other kinds of things. Which
I don't want to watch that show.
Right. Which, if you don't want to watch it, then don't. But there's a similar backlash and a similar kind of sensationalism and a similar, shall we say, artistic decision-making around let's show it and let's really show this. And from what I understand, it's the second season got a little out of control, and whatever sort of redeeming qualities the first season had, the second season kind of lost things. Now, having said that, I'm guessing that there is still a section of the population who loved the first season and loved the second season. So, and it's, it's a piece of entertainment. It's not a public health educational show. I mean, that's what I think is another thing that's interesting about this conversation in the media is like 13 Reasons Why is treated like public, that people are talking about it as a public health thing. And I'm like, no one looks to Star Wars or any, for that matter, any actual soap opera.
Casino.
That has
Goodfellas.
Yeah. That has like all sorts of, implications and violence and like messages that it's giving audiences and teenagers, by the way. No one says like, well, what's being taken away from this, or should this be even being made is the question. Should is this irresponsible?
Politicians will raise these questions as if the question itself provides the answer. Like the answer must be yes, even though there's no data that suggests there's any link between violent video games and violence.
Right. Yeah.
I really appreciate your point here about what's the bigger picture here. This is just one little show. Mm-hmm. Whatever. It has its place in the universe. Fine. But if we really want to solve a problem, let's not simplify it like down to one stupid show.
Right.
What's going on in the rest of the world.
Right. Similar to video games.
Yeah.
Might video games be that 100th factor that influences someone to be violent against another human being or something? Okay. It's not a stretch of the imagination that if you are have been abused, if you're alone, if you have been raised in a culture around guns, if you're male, and if you've been socialized to be tough, you've been socialized not to talk about your emotions, you've been socialized to be aggressive when you're upset, if you've seen countless TV shows and news reports about particular perpetrators of these events, if you've seen YouTube videos aggrandizing people who, like Elliot Rodger, who did these kinds of things, and they're heroes now. If you are being bullied, if your parents aren't listening to you, you don't have a mental health system that is very welcoming to you. You have maybe even a therapist that didn't know how to talk to a teenager who doesn't trust therapists. You add all that up, and then they play a video game. That could have been a minor factor, I suppose, if anything. But let's focus on the other things. Let's focus on helping families to love each other. Let's focus on helping kids to feel like they're okay people. Let's focus on helping people to get along better. Let's focus on not pressuring children to make them feel like shit because they're not getting an A or a B, or because they're not, on the cheerleading squad, or they can't sing like an angel. Let's focus on helping parents to not be so stressed out with work so that they can't pay attention to their newborn. Let's focus on family planning so people don't have kids when they don't want to have kids, and consequently don't have a setup to be able to raise that kid. Let's focus on healthcare so that people aren't going bankrupt because they now I hear like the presidential music behind me right now, and it's like Kirk Honda for president. Like I'm running, and this is my
you got my vote.
This is sounding like a fucking what do they call it?
Stump speech.
Stump speech. I wanted to call it a soapbox speech, but it could be that as well. I mean, there's a lot of things. As a society we could be doing, and banning certain Netflix shows is probably not one of them, or certain video games is probably not one of them. All right, Bob.
When you put it like that.
What's the final word on grief and suicide and 13 Reasons Why and stump speeches?
Oh, it's hard to be alive.
It's hard to be alive.
Yeah. I don't know how to sum it up. I feel bad for David. I don't know why. I think David's okay, but I just feel bad for him.
And for the people who have died.
Yeah.
And for the people who think about killing themselves, and for people who are suffering from a loss, and for Brian Yorkie, who is incurring tons of bad press because of his association with this TV show.
Well, if he comes on the podcast.
Yeah. Knowing him though, like he is probably laughing himself to sleep every night. Like he so he's perfect for high school depictions because he was huge. He was a huge figure in our high school. One, he was a large dude, just tall, big guy. But he also, he was ASB president, for example.
What's that?
Student president
Yeah.
of the school, not just of your class,
Yeah.
but like student president. He was always involved in various different things. Him and I were in plays together. And
To your year.
what?
Did he graduate with you?
Yeah.
No shit.
I spent the night at his house. We actually we were writing a musical together because I was a songwriter in my later high school years, and we started to write a musical together. There's no way I would have been able to write a real musical. I'm not that kind of musician, but he was just like, well, here's a musician. Let's write a musical, and we started writing a musical together. Yeah. We would have parties at his house and sleepovers and mixtapes. We did all that stuff, and we were into the same music. No, after high school didn't see him very much. He was so busy, and he traveled. He was always in New York and San Francisco and stuff, and I've seen him at high school reunions and also at like weddings and stuff, and occasionally we'll text each other and stuff. The one thing I learned
you're
from
coming up on your 30.
Yeah, which I'm planning right now, by the way.
Oh, you're doing it.
Well, it didn't start out. So I was a part of the big planning committee of the 20 year.
No kidding.
And the 30 year is coming up, high school reunion. And we've been reaching out to the same people, but like everyone is kind of flaking or just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I as a program director at my university, I learned a lot of skills of administration, and I also learned that, and there are some processes that really can only happen if one person just makes it happen.
Yeah.
There's committees, just think if you've never been on a committee, just think about group projects you've done in school where any weak link completely throws the whole thing off. And sometimes it just requires a leader to step forward and say, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And so that's where I'm at with the reunion. I'm just like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And because it's not that big of a deal, one, because it's not like I'm planning a wedding or something, It's like, plus with Facebook and I guess Facebook, it makes it really easy.
Yeah.
Like, so I spent about 15 minutes last night designing a survey, and then I, sent it out to everyone over Facebook, and now I'm getting all these responses, and I'm just going to do what the survey says, and basically what the survey is saying is people are willing to pay something $25-$50 for a ticket, and they basically want a private room at a bar. They don't want a banquet. They don't want a super casual event like at a regular bar where there's other customers there. They want like a private room at a bar, $25 ticket,
food and drink.
They want to mingle, and and I asked, like, do you want dancing or karaoke? And so people just want to mingle, and so that's what I'm going to do. And
nice.
And if no one comes, it's like, well, that's what the survey said. Like I asked everyone, and it's not hard to find a venue that would, sign up for $25 a head, kind of a thing. But
painting table.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not there anymore.
Yeah. Is it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it's something else now, but
yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Not a lot of things stay around.
No, you do. That's it.
And Maneki, the Japanese restaurant in the Chinatown, it's been there for like 150 years.
Wow.
It's like it's reportedly the oldest restaurant in Seattle that's still in operation. Yeah. And it's my favorite Japanese restaurant in Seattle.
Really?
Maneki.
What's great about it?
It feels like my grandma's kitchen.
There you go. Got it.
And it also has a diverse menu. Like most people, when they think of Japanese food today, they think of sushi.
Yeah.
Sushi is like, I don't know, 1% of Japanese food. It'd be like if you're Italian and people are really into just salami. It's like, what about pizza and spaghetti and like,
antipasto and olives,
French
and
bread or
wine.
Wine. Yeah, it's like for some reason when it comes to Japanese cuisine, which is just as complex as French cuisine,
sure,
or Italian cuisine, right. Everyone focuses on sushi, and really just like a particular kind of sushi, which was basically invented by people in the United States, which is with the rice on the outside,
Yeah.
which is fine. I like that too, but it's just an extreme niche thing. And when I want Japanese food, I want options. I want I'm getting my mouth's watering. I want onigiri. I want fried fish. I want funyu, which actually isn't Japanese, but I want kimchi. I want I want pickled plums and pickled onions, and I don't know, takwan and teriyaki stuff and yakisoba, and there's just all these things that are soul food to me. And and sushi is, it's a part of it, but so half the Japanese restaurants in Seattle, it's only sushi.
Yeah.
That's all they got. They have they'll have edamame, which honestly, I didn't grow up with edamame. So when I think of edamame, I only think about Americanized Japanese restaurants. I don't know if that's a big thing in Japan, but people love edamame, and I'm like, it's just beans. It's just beans with a little bit of salt on it. Like you can boil up some lima beans at home. It's not that much of a difference. But anyway, so it has a broad menu that has a lot of great items that are appealing to Japanese Americans, and not so appealing. There are items on that menu that you would look at and you'd be like, I don't even know what that is, and I don't think I would like it. The other thing is that in a typical Japanese fashion, it is designed really poorly, but interestingly. So there's basically 4 different rooms in that restaurant. There's like a bar area that's super cramped. There's the regular restaurant floor, which is also super cramped. They have tatami rooms, which are not super cramped and are great. You sit on the floor and blah blah blah. And then then there's this back secret bar. This that you can order food in all the places, but it's like totally like think of like a Studio Ghibli cartoon. Do you ever watch Studio Ghibli? No. I just think of like, I don't know, it's just super complicated. Like it'd be like if someone wanted to design just for a movie sake, like a very complicated Japanese restaurant that didn't make any sense. That's what this restaurant's like, and that's the way a lot of Japanese things are designed. Actually, Japanese people are extremely, in general, they can design things very well. But if it's one thing that is not to American cultural standards, is their attention to space. Because in Tokyo and other cities, there's not a lot of space, so everything's real crammed in. People get real used to things being crammed in, and I find that Japanese restaurants and grocery stores have just a terrible sense. I feel claustrophobic, like Wajimaya. Do you know Wajimaya?
Sure.
The old Wajimaya was even worse, man. That was just like the worst. But the new Wajimaya, have I ever ranted to you about the new Wajimaya?
You have not.
And the new Wajimaya is literally 20 years old. So the old Wajimaya, so it's this Japanese grocery store, and it has everything. It's got like books and food and fish, and it's just this gigantic Japanese American extravaganza. So much so that when I have Japanese relatives that come into town, we just go to the grocery store. Like imagine that. It's like, ooh, everyone's in town. Let's go to the grocery store.
We'll go to Safeway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, our German relatives are in town. Let's go to QFC. And it's the same, but because that's our home, and like my dad knew the owners and everything. Anyway,
neat.
So they decided that they needed to expand because they were doing so much business, and so they bought another lot nearby, and they could completely redesign everything, from the ground up, and so they could like make it actually flow well. Well, so there's all these problems with that, but the major problem is the parking lot. So you don't think about parking lot design until it's bad.
Yeah.
But tell me, you're a smart person. You could probably just think of it off the top of your head. What are some key elements to a parking lot that need to be in place in order for it to flow well?
Gotta have cars able to go by them, by each other, and you back out. You're not just backing out into somebody else's spot. Blah blah. Yeah.
Okay.
You need
That's
room.
good. The parking lot is okay with that. What are some other elements that you could think of?
Lines.
What?
Lines.
Okay. They got lines. What are some other elements you can think of?
I don't know.
Well, the one that I am getting at, the one that they're terrible at, is the pedestrian versus car situation. So think of every parking lot you've ever been in.
Right.
Like, where's the entrance versus where's the entrance to the building? Do you know what I mean? The entrance to the parking lot is usually far away.
Oh yeah, you don't put it by the front door.
Right. Because especially with a place like Wajimaya where you have lines of people trying to get in because
high traffic.
Right. So the line of cars getting in and the parking booth that you take money is right in front of the front door. Right in front. So every time you leave or come, you have to traverse these cars.
Right.
When if you just put that booth on the other side of the parking lot, which would have actually even been better for traffic on the streets outside, because the street farthest away from the entrance has actually more lanes, you would have solved the problem. And it sounds like an obvious thing to do, But again, because Japanese designers, they just don't, it's like, well, who needs space? There's no space in the world. And then, they designed the new Wajimaya, and at first it was glorious because they had these really Americanized huge aisles with tons of space. But then they proceeded to fill all those aisles with a bunch of junk and displays and delis and, and so it's better than it was before, but so this is the episode in which I just bitch about parking at Wajimaya. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
You deserve it.